Alrighty, so week 4, day 4 attendance is our important week in our class because it's our first Develop It Dev 1. What accounts for 50% of your grade is due this week. And last night in class, we had a really great discussion just about all topics related to the code that we had finished up, the project. I went over my code. I'll show you in a minute how I'm sharing it for reference for you just to see another example. And we talked about debugging, which I'm going to spend a little time on. But what's really important right now is to understand the requirements, right? So I redid them a little bit more, giving detail for what I meant by what accounts for 50%, which is really taking that notes functionality and implementing it with your own concept, okay? So I've laid out the specifics, and there's probably some I've forgotten, but these I want to make sure you've done, okay? So again, this is a great time for you to ask questions, right? So if you have a question about this, I've worked with over half of you last night, got some good progress, right? So, but you will need at least minimum three different command line commands where we did add notes, list notes, read notes, remove notes. You need at least 3 different ones. And you need to add, and this is some unique functionality that was not implemented in the Notes app, okay? And the user output needs to be meaningful, right? So, so you must your code must be functional to receive full points, and it needs to be located in the private repo in a dev and then dev 1. So let me just show you this. So here's where I put mine, right? So under your private repo, while you're in here, you can create, in this case, a new folder. I've already done this. And then in that folder, create another new folder, dev_1, and this is where you put your code, okay? Make sure you do have your Git Ignore file based in that root of your private so that it's not publishing your node modules. So what that should look like as a review here is that this is excluding any of the VS Code settings, and this is the one that actually excludes the node modules even if it's in a subdirectory. So make sure you have that created and get the workflow to get it up to the GitHub. But most importantly, it handles what happens locally, okay? So the other thing is, and most of you, which is great, have already signed up. I've given a Google Sheet here for code reviews. So we have a few times left, right? So make sure you're on this list. I think most of you are. I think I only have a couple of people left. And again, if you want to do it before Monday, right, you'd have to be seeing me Friday, and Friday's only virtual. And then today, Thursday, I'm on campus from noon until 12:50. Okay, so you know, if I have to go, hopefully these both fill up, and I think we are be good to go, because some of these might go shorter. But get on the list so we can get you in there, because the code review part of this is where really I'm grading your work with you. You're walking me through, you're telling me, and this is an important part, and this is why the students in class I think really benefit from having us go through and look at and talk about the code that we've been writing, because I want you to be able to describe to me what your code is doing. So not only does it have to be functional, you have to be able to tell me what it's doing. Describe. Doesn't have to be perfect, doesn't have to sound like a seasoned programmer, just a concept so you understand that. And then here's the key, right? So if you don't do one of these, but you submit code, just know that there's a big ding to your grade for that, right? Okay, so the only other thing I would say, and you know, always check, and I'm just going to pull up my public repo, always check, because I did this last night, and I actually had done it before last night on my public, as I gave examples of what the work for last night needed to look like. And some of you missed this, right? So this is what it could be formatted differently, but my 3 commands, right? So my new, my transaction, and balance. Oh, I forgot balance. So that's good. I remembered I'm missing one. And then I gave examples of what the command line would look like. I gave examples of the output, and I gave examples of what the file format will look like. And this is what I expected from you last night. So if you didn't get this, you can turn it in later if you didn't get all of it, but always make sure you're checking my public for examples. And having said that, the other thing I provided last night, or this morning, was actually, I gave you my example of what I did, and we went over this in class, so I'm not going to take this video to do it, but you're welcome to check it out, is how I implemented my dev1. And you can see my 3 commands here. You can look, there's nothing really different, a little bit different in the functionality, but as far as looking different than the Notes app, it's not significantly different. Where it really diverts is really in your own module that you've created, your own functions, right? So you can take a look at mine. Basically, it's doing an open ledger so that I set up I have new users on my real coin. They buy in a certain amount, right? I check to see if they've already had an opening balance, and then I do transaction between senders and receivers, and in order to do that I have to make sure both have opening balances and that they have enough in their balance in order to submit the transaction or to complete the transaction. So there's nothing really outrageous here, and then there's a balance, right? But for those of you who are trying to do a total, right, you can at least see how I did this, okay? This is one example. Okay, so the key is, you know, take what you've learned and now create something, all right? And definitely you guys are all very diverse in what you're going for. But what's important, and I'm gonna say this as a heads up because I saw a couple of you do it, when you're actually going to set up your code, right? I saw some of you, because this is where you're inputting, right? I'm creating user input, all of these, but remember what I'm doing here is I'm writing to a data file, right? So in this case, I'm setting up this transaction, or the way this looks in my data file is basically here, where I'm setting up a new user. But it has the same format as my next one, which is my transaction, right? So in my transaction, then it's what outputs is the same, right? There's another, so I'm doing a transaction, let's say here, right? So here's a transaction between the two. So what's important is understanding that one challenge students run into, and I saw this last night, is that if you're trying to modify data that you pushed into the array, it's doable. It just requires more work. So what you want is you want your commands to actually input data consistently. That way when you're asking for that data back, it's easier to get. Because if your file format has got varying lengths and varying data, I mean, that's where you almost have to say, I'm going to create another file. And then you have to be able to process those too, so it just increases the level of complexity, which, if you're up for that, totally cool. That's awesome. Okay, so I just want to say that. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is probably one of the things that I saw the most beneficial to students. So in this series that we just finished, learning how to debug. So Andrew taught you how to debug at the command line, right? Using node, inspect, right? And then dropping into the command line. And then he showed you also how to change the command line to do BRK so that you can open up the dev tools. Totally awesome, all those. I want to show you a third way that I use, which is actually directly in VS Code. And I find it to be the best, but really the key is it doesn't matter which way you use it, figure out how to run and understand how to use the debugging tools, because debugging is your friend. The sooner you learn it, the less time you're going to have to spend trying to figure out what your code's doing, because these debugging tools are going to tell you how it's working, okay? So let me just show you the one setup thing you have to do inside of VS Code. Because in our case, we're actually running, at least on this first one, and I think also on the next program that we do, you have command line arguments that you're passing, right? So you have to be able to handle that. And in VS Code, what you want to do is you first to just start debugging, right? It's good to have your code up, because I'll show you why in a minute. And then hit the bug over here. And then you can add, if you have never done that, which most of you probably have not, I'm going to open my launch JSON file. And in here, this stuff will probably be pretty standard, right? So this is just telling like where the file is setting. Actually can change this. I'm going to play with this later, but it's okay just to have it because this is pointing to the actual program, the JS file that starts this. But here's the key, is you want to add args, okay? And all you have to do is create a new line in there, create a comma, right? Because this is a object. And then in this is your property. And then create an array. And then this is your command. And then this is your argument that you're passing in. And what's key here is where at the command line we did quotes here. Don't do that, just wrap the whole thing in a quote. Okay? So once you've done that part, debugging is really fun and easy, and actually it is whichever way you go. But now what you want to do is set a breakpoint, right? So in this case, I'm going to run my debugger, and it's going to break right here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to hit debug, and what we see here is now, and VS Code looks a little different. It actually is trying to show you we're in debug mode now. Shows you the call stack, shows you any local variables that we have set up. And because we've already, at this point of the code, you can see what the command is. As a matter of fact, if you just hover over, and this is some of the nice functionality that you see in Chrome DevTools, is there as well. And so to do this, to just step through the code, right? So, and if you hover over, step into, right? Step out of, and then step over. So most of the time you use these two, and I'll show you what I mean. So if I want to step into the next line, I just hit step. And so this processes this line. And so at this point, this line is not processed, and this is where it's going to call the method, right? Notes, add note, and pass in these arguments. And so watch what it does when I step in here. Then it switches over here and shows me what it's doing. And this is the way you can really understand how your code, what your code is doing. Okay, so now we're going to run through this, right? So now I can step through. And now, because it's fetching the notes, I can actually see what it's doing. And when something like this happens, what it's showing you is that, and this is the importance of understanding what require is doing. Require FS, this is the file system. Now what's happening now where we're reading the file is actually is running this code. So it's like, this is not code you have to think about, really. It's good to know it's there, it's good to know what it does. But what you can do at this point is just say, you know what, step out. I don't want to see that. Right, so then it drops you back here, and then you can continue, and if that happens again, which it will, just say step out. And so what you can see here, right, as we're running through these lines, right, for some reason, maybe it's, let me just drop through, right, now I actually have my notes, right, so now I can see what's in there. And by the way, remember on your launch, or on your launch JSON, if you have a note that's already in there, it's going to throw an error, right? But my point about any of this is really, you know, understanding this is not defined because we're not using that concept here. It does show me what each of these values are, which is awesome, right? So again, I'm just trying to show you another way to do this. And now we're going to iterate over there. So we see that iteration because there's only one. That's really straightforward. I can now see that there's nothing in there, there's no duplicates, and I can just walk through the code, and then eventually it comes back here. So my whole point about this is figure out how to use debugging, whichever way you do it, command line, Chrome Dev, the way I've shown. Just figure out what works for you, because the sooner you learn how to debug your code, the more happy you're going to be, because you're going to figure out the code. This debugging tool will show you what that code's doing. Okay, I think that's it for me. I will open as normal this up. You can see this now. You can, and then once we come into class on that night, and by the way, this night we'll have no discussion collectively, but I will have by that time, I've already released the next series and I will have the Learn Together. But this week, starting right now, really, and last night, many of you, this is the week, this is the only thing you're focused on. That's why I only do it. I will only give this item in this week. Okay? All right. Have a great one, and I look forward to seeing your code next week. Enjoy. Bye.